American audiences inherited Dracula's curse just 2 months before the Super Famicom launched in Japan. Mario was the first icon out of the gate to promote the new system. NES veteran Simon Belmont would follow less than a year later on Halloween 1991, and in his quickest turnaround appear on the Super Nintendo only 2 months later. The Whipcracker breached the SNES before Samus, Kirby, Mega Man, and even Donkey Kong. Super Castlevania IV was less of a new chapter and more a nod to the first entry in the series. The controller gave Simon another button for his sub-weapon, and his arsenal mirrored that of Castlevania I. The brand new Mode 7 graphics let the castle twist and rotate around the player, and their leaps got luckier with the ability to control Simon's fall after each perilous jump and swing from hanging hooks. The greatest achievement was the ability to snap the whip in 8 directions instead of 2. This meant bosses never cheated their way out of your reach, and Simon could slay enemies without moving a muscle. The whip, and the entire inventory for that matter, leveled up like before. The elements that weren't broken stayed classic, and Konami brought in baddies from Simon's Quest and Dracula's Curse to dwell in added environments leading up to the castle door. Masanori Adachi and Taro Kudo produced the score, composing new tracks and remixing old ones. The endemic themes they revisited would become expected by fans in future installments, no matter which Belmont was chosen. It was this nostalgia that fueled what would become the last in the series to be named numerically. Like the quests that came before it, Castlevania IV did not sell over 1 million units and is not considered one of the Super Nintendo's best-selling games. It is considered one of the best in the series, however, and a fitting tribute to the original. With a new generation beckoning, the saga story would finally move forward on another console. The PC Engine, which ironically launched on Halloween in 1987, was the first game system with an optional CD-based peripheral. It was upgraded to combat the rocketing popularity of the Super Famicom in Japan. The same year Bonk 3 and Street Fighter II joined its library, Konami chose to put a new spin on their Demon Castle series with a brand new Belmont. The PC Engine in America was called the TurboGrafx 16. Castlevania Rondo of Blood hit stores 2 days before Halloween in 1993. The title is directly translated as Rin, a Japanese term for the Buddhist rotation of death and rebirth. A rondo is a musical form that is often referencing a return to a particular theme or motif. It was the first installment with a 3-word subtitle, a naming convention that would become a series tradition. The newest Belmont was named Richter, and he entered Castlevania not solely to overthrow Dracula, but also to rescue his girlfriend and 3 other captives. The first of these, Maria Renard, joined Richter for the duration. The 12-year-old mage harnessed the power of the animal kingdom to attack and defend, not to mention a life-saving double jump, and the player could swap freely between the 2 heroes. Rondo also added a villain to the fold, a dark priest named Shaft, who resurrected classic bosses and orchestrated the Master of the Estate's return. These stage-ending monsters were a bit feistier than before, often getting in one last shot after their life bar hit rock bottom. Richter inherited his father's equipment, but could also pick up a copy of the Good Book that would swirl around him as an offensive shield. Along with the standard sub-weapons, players could also unleash an item crash, which gave each weapon a heavier attack at the expense of additional hearts. The path to Dracula's tower crossed 9 stages, with 4 extra hidden areas. There were no overworld map transitions and no whip upgrades. The whip on the first screen was the whip Richter took into the last fight. Rondo of Blood won the award for the best Japanese action game of 1994 by Electronic Gaming Monthly, and is considered a major turning point for the franchise. Anime had no doubt inspired Castlevania's design, but for the first time these illustrations were used to tell the story cinematically. The style, combined with the CD format's access to recorded dialogue, made the story resonate more than the Belmont's pixelated past. The US market expected to miss out on the 10th title in the series, but a port called Dracula X was shipped over in September of 1995. Unfortunately, it ended up being less than expected. On its own, Dracula X was a solid game, reflective of what the US had grown to love about Castlevania. But anyone who had rondoed with Richter 1 year earlier knew what this new entry lacked compared to the original. Maria was removed as a playable character, the hidden levels mysteriously dropped from 4 to 2, and familiar zones were given an unwarranted remodel. Konami took a second stab at the port in 2007 with the Dracula X Chronicles for the PSP. This time they started from scratch, throwing Maria back in and drawing the castle and the cutscenes with 3D polygons. Anyone unfamiliar with this chapter in the timeline could also unlock a faithful copy of the PC Engine original, along with the game's smash hit PS1 sequel. Gamers could also rediscover the hidden classic on the Wii's Virtual Console in April of 2008. Those who chose to oppose Dracula via their Super Nintendo were still waiting on Dracula X when the Sega Genesis received their first and only Castlevania game. Bloodlines launched in all regions in May of 1994. It received a GA from Sega's own Video Game Rating Council, which would shut its doors later the same year. Although dubbed appropriate for all ages, it stands as one of the goriest games in the franchise. Super Street Fighter II and Wing Commander, on the other hand, were intended for mature audiences only. The title screen offered 2 slayers to choose from, unlike previous adventures that posted them at predetermined spots along the path. John Morris was the chosen Belmont, instructed in the ways of the whip, including the ability to swing from the ceiling, and Eric Lecard was a master lanceman with a high jump and a thirst for vengeance after his love was turned into a blood-sucking beast. While the game was as linear as ever, it traveled far beyond the castle walls and even the borders of Romania. Chasing the niece of Count Dracula, Elizabeth Bartley, and her follower, the witch Drolta Fuentes, players visited a shrine to the lost city of Atlantis in Greece, the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Italy, a retired munitions factory in Germany, the Versailles Palace in France, and the fictional Castle Proserpina in England. The villainesses were indirect references to real-life Gothic figures Ursabet Bathory and Dorothea Sentes, and the opening subtly suggests they ordered the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, an event which is believed to have sparked World War I. Even more perplexing were supposed ties to Bram Stoker's novel. John Morris was identified as the son of Quincy Morris, referred to as an indirect descendant of the Belmont clan. Quincy was the Texan who bested the Count at the cost of his own life in the book's finale. Bloodlines built a new audience for Castlevania on a new console. When the system was stacked with the 32X and CD add-ons, Konami sought to bring Richter and Maria back. They commissioned Koji Igarashi, a programmer for Daytona Twinbee and Gradius 2, to direct the sequel. Bloodlines composer Mishiro Yamane was attached to compose the score, and Ayami Kojima began producing elaborate illustrations to realize the characters. The game was never named because it was never finished, although fans have dubbed the Phantom Project the Bloodletting. Konami moved the team to Sony's PlayStation 1. It's rumored that much of the work they had already finished went with them. Castlevania Symphony of the Night was released on March 20th, 1997. The US sank their teeth into it 7 months later. Dracula's Black Sheep Alucard was the main playable character. Richter could be unlocked after the game was completed, and started the game via a flashback to Rondo of Blood that was incorrectly labeled Bloodlines. The conditions of this first battle, such as damage taken and items used, affected Alucard's stats when players later assumed control of the brooding vampire. Aside from a quick stroll through the bordering forest, the game took place entirely inside Dracula's castle. Players could quickly bring up the map and chart their progress. Other than an inaccessible ledge or locked door, the whole of the fortress was theirs to explore, with major areas separated by uniform loading hallways. The series borrowed the format from another popular Nintendo original, leaving fans of both to question whether Symphony of the Night was more Castleroid or Metroidvania. The free-roaming map was a breakthrough and the first in a cornucopia of gameplay improvements. Alucard now gained experience points and levels, increasing his strength or dexterity, could acquire new abilities like swimming and double jumping, shapeshift into a bat or wolf or misty cloud, discover or purchase new equipment to wear and wield, and recruit several familiars to tag along, including a fairy, demon, ghost, bat, and sword.
This switch hasn't been pressed yet.
A quick backdash pulled Alucard out of danger, expendable weapons could be used one time for increased damage or range, potions or food cured curses and helped resist certain elements, and special button combinations triggered a cache of magical spells. The game was so deep that a third of the content was almost hidden. All roads led to a climax with Richter Belmont in the Count's throne room, and Alucard could strike down the former hero, queuing up an end cinema and credits. But if you met up with Maria beforehand, Alucard could see a green orb circling the hunter and discover that Richter was being possessed by the enigmatic shaft. This opened a portal traveling above the clouds to an upside-down version of the entire castle, with new monsters, bosses, and plot twists to uncover. About the only thing fans found fault in was the overall difficulty, and not in the way they were used to. With the ability to make Alucard superpowered through leveling, some veterans found the game a cakewalk, even when exclusively using the first weapon they were given. None of the easiness detracted from the awesomeness, however, and Konami worked up a port of Symphony for Sega in June of 1998. The Saturn version had 2 new sections, along with more music, enemies, bosses, and items. In 2007, it reappeared on Xbox Live Arcade, the PlayStation Network, and hidden within Dracula X Chronicles for the PSP. Symphony of the Night was the most drastically improved game in the series. No single game in the franchise had received the amount of new features that Igarashi and team found room for on the PS1. It stubbornly stayed 2D when every franchise in the industry was scrambling for a way to make that extra dimension work, proving a series can stay true to itself while still blowing players' minds. Like its brethren, it was cursed into obscurity, again failing to climb sales charts and rest among the most lucrative games on the system. But it did garner a ferocious fan following, dare anyone to remove it from a top 100 games list, and write the blueprint for how the series should, and eventually would, continue. After sticking to the Famicom for 3 years, Castlevania spent the better part of the 90s taking big risks on new consoles. Almost every platform got an exclusive entry, and word of this bloodthirsty franchise began to reach players that might have missed its 8-bit era entirely. By the time Symphony played its masterful melody, no one could deny the series' brilliance simply because it was too difficult. Could the series reinvent itself even further? In Part 3 of the Castlevania Retrospective, the Belmonts enter unfamiliar territory as Konami struggles to find a place for their House of Horrors in a new 3D generation. New projects rise and fall, the Nintendo 64 witnesses some of Castlevania's darkest days, and a lament of lore sets the series straight from the very beginning.